All right, well, welcome everybody, and welcome to your day or evening or afternoon or wherever it is, wherever you are. For me, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm in Brisbane in Queensland, Australia today, and I'd like to acknowledge the country that I'm on, and also that where I live and work, which is a Wabakal country in Newcastle in New South Wales. So I invite anybody who would like to acknowledge country where they are to put their locations and things into the chat. It also helps us get a sense of the spread of where everybody is in the world today. So this session, I'm going to kick off, and then my very lovely colleagues, Christina Jern and Catherine McKinnon, are going to follow. We've each got a sort of slightly discrete piece that we're going to put forward. They're intended in the spirit of a bit of a discussion starter, a conversation starter, because we're really interested to hear what this group's got to say about this topic. The sort of seed for the session came from the writing retreat that Christina and I and various others who are here on the meeting and in the network were part of in June this year. We'd set ourselves a task as a group of reviewing the papers from the CERN's publication list that you might be familiar with, and we each nominated an area of interest that we were looking at, and I was looking at policy and governance and state actors, sort of broadly conceived, and there's over 300 papers on that list, so going through them and sort of trying to pull out what might be related to this topic was interesting. In the end, I reviewed 11 papers, and I was quite surprised that there weren't more that engaged with the topic. So that was the sort of starting point. But on the very first day, we also made the decision collectively to revisit the seminal J.K. Gibson-Graham paper, Diverse Economies, Performative Practices from Other Worlds from 2008 that people might be familiar with. And Catherine challenged us to think about what a kind of update paper might look like if it were written today. What might be the new horizons for CE and DE research and practice? So what I'm going to speak to today responds to those two framings. We'll each take 5 or 7 or something around about that minutes to offer some sort of conversation starter type thinking, and then we'll turn it over to the group for discussion, because we're really interested to hear what you've all got to think about this idea of policy, the state and community economies. And at the end of each of our sections, we'll pose a question to each of you. So we'll have 3 questions once we've all gone that we're hoping will be a good way to kind of get the conversation going. So jumping in, we talked quite a bit at the retreat about how the context now, compared to when that 2008 paper was written, is really quite different from when it's not really a small area of inquiry anymore. It's everywhere. People are interested in this sort of alternative approach or different ways of thinking about economy and communities, and all of the things that we engage with in our work, and from lots of different angles and from with different underpinning agendas. So we talked quite a lot about that at the retreat, and different examples of that and different groups that are sort of engaged in it and how we might engage with those. But when I was reviewing the papers and of course, influenced by my own interests and background, I found a bit of a common thread around state processes and actors in various ways, that they all, sort of all about blocking or constraining community economies and more broadly other change-related work. And when you start looking, it comes up in lots of different contexts and different forms, whether it's a regulation, a policy setting, more informal practices, or the assumed characters of individuals or even of institutions themselves. And even where they aren't directly constraining or blocking, these things are almost always there as part of the background landscape, influencing enabling conditions and other contextual factors. So what emerged for me from the retreat was a little piece of a thought experiment, trying to think about what if we were to take a sort of state as diverse actor approach to an analysis of these kinds of relations, with state being, I'm kind of broadly conceiving that here to cover a range of different sort of what could be thought of as state-based actors. I don't have time today to go into the personal framing I'll bring to it, but I suppose it's worth saying that I come from a sort of counterculture background, and it's been a deliberate choice of mine to work with and for various forms of state actor over the years. And some of my research focus is there, and I've always looked for opportunities to kind of get inside the skin of the machine to better understand and hopefully to better influence. So that's kind of my orientation to this, I guess. So I've boiled it down to, from the long piece that we did at the retreat and the much longer conversations that we had about it there, to just a few observations that sparked for me. And I'm not going to go into the other CERN papers I reviewed here, but they were also really interesting on these topics. I'm going to assume that in the interest of time that everyone here will be at least somewhat familiar with the themes from the paper, because they're very central to CE work. So I'm just going to quickly show some short passages on the screen while I talk briefly to my thought experiment. So I'm just going to switch the share screen. So give me 1 second. And there, and where have you all gone? There you are. So how I've organised this is that the headings that you see on each of the slides are the sort of sections of the paper. So and the text that's there are sort of just basically little excerpts from that paper that was sort of the things that got me thinking, I suppose, about this idea. So because of my own practitioner experience of working in and around state actors, what I have observed over the years is that, and thinking about this this piece on the screen, that there's nothing is as set as what it can seem from the outside. There's always many nuances, and if there's processes, relations, and norms and things that were more visible and better understood, my thinking has always been, could all that offer more openings for our kinds of work? In effect, the same kinds of thinking exercises applied to enterprise and capitalism those decades ago, is it decades yet? A couple of almost decade and a bit, applied to policy, governance, and the state. So that's kind of was the first anchor point that I was working with, and then moving into the sort of the idea of the becoming different economic subjects. I found it really interesting to think about this assumed always already co-opted positioning in relation to state processes and actors, and how that in a way kind of reinforces a kind of monolithic representation. And in different ways, we've all chosen to engage in this project of dismantling this when it comes to capitalism and commercial enterprise models. The state's an ecosystem actor too, one with a lot of influence over what happens with and to all the fledgling, CE&D initiatives that we research and work with. So could a similar type of conceptual reframing help to shift those kinds of relations, or at least those entry points for engaging with, I suppose? In the ethics of thinking section of the paper, this thinking back into Catherine's call to us at the retreat to think about future trajectories for CE&D conceptual development, but also practice development. How can that open stance that we advocate and practice and hold very dear manifest in the context that we now find ourselves in, where there's an interest in experimenting with new economies, concepts, tools, relations, etc., from so many different quarters? How can we use this interest to open up rather than assume it represents co-option, and so close out possibilities? In this section about sort of ontological reframing, this idea that, these kind of reframings increase our space of decision and room. Again, state processes and actors are there in the background, almost always, really, in some form or other, but they're most often treated as a structural given to the situation that we find ourselves in, and the work of others that we are engaging with. So, if things weren't as given, what might that do for us if we are engaging in this space? So, and then the section about creativity and generating possibilities, that brought me back to an earlier point in the 2008 piece about fostering the conditions for inchoate experimentation. That, collectively as societies and as a planet, we need that kind of work in the public sector and the state realm as well. And we need to bring concepts and practice to that to shape and inform, as well as support individual and groups of state-based actors to be brave in their own experimentation. It is the way we could create extension of our own work and influence the trajectories of others. Maybe not in a kind of revolution sort of a way that's a silver bullet that's going to, provide the answer for everything, but in a piece by piece way that also enlarges capabilities to engage with nuance and ethical thinking and practices along the way. And then finally, this idea of collective experimentation. There was an example given about the role of the social economy and social enterprise and social welfare provision. And to better understand these kinds of experiments, which many of us in this network are, involved in studying and researching and advocating for, I think, we need to better understand the experiences of all of those involved, the multiplicity of actors that are always in part of these sorts of initiatives, including the state-based actors who are also experimenting with within their own contexts and boundaries for action. And so they're grappling with all the same criticisms we see levelled at diverse economies work. It's unviable, it's unsustainable, it's too small, etc., etc. So what are the standards that those are involved being held to, and how can we, through our research and practices, support a better sense of possibility, more interesting testing processes, and an increased risk for an appetite to experiment and risk, really, to try something new. So that's my sort of thoughts and framing, and I hope that worked okay to have the things on the screen. I was trying to do it quickly, and I'm sort of assuming that people have some understanding of those background concepts in C&D work. So I hope that wasn't too quick, but I want to get on to the others because I know they've got great things to say too. And I'm going to put my question into the chat, but we'll come back to them once we've done the three. So hold your thoughts for that. Thank you, Christina.
Yes, thanks, Jo. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Jan. I'm calling from Copenhagen in Denmark. And it's good to see you all. It's really nice to be able to have this conversation with you all. It started off with many other people, Jo included. So I look forward to hearing what you say. So I'm just going to give you some very brief points as to why I'm at all interested in this question of the state and policy. So I'm trained as a political scientist, and I kind of ran away from that discipline because of its state-centric approach to politics and policy in general. And that's what led me to really get interested in economic lives and the politics of economy in general. And I guess today I would be inspired to, have been thinking a lot about the relationship between the iceberg, or what an iceberg would look like for political theory and political science in general. So as capital is to economy, or capitalism is to economy, so is state to politics in a sense, right? There is this tendency to overemphasize or to use the state as a describer for or the real political society, and then everything else that is not the state is often talked about in lesser terms, or it has to relate to the state in somehow. And this is something I found very much in my work on illicit economies and illicit forms of governance, such as mafias and gangs, for instance, that generally are criminal forms of social organization, are seen as less worthy forms, or they're always measured up against this the state norm or the state social formation. And discourses such as corruption is destroying democracies, or the post-colony. This was really highlighted by the Comroff in their book Law and Disorder in the Post-Colony. Crime and violence is often a reaction or a result of of the imposition of a particular type of governance. So indigenous and alternative forms of governance conflict with those and lead to the explosion of violence. So crime is more an indicator of a process of forceful domination at times. So these ideas really led me to think about, that there's really a parallel between state centrism and capitalocentrism in political discourse. And I think it would be interesting to kind of give dignity to these different types of governance beyond, and move beyond the stigmatization of them. And just realizing that even within state practices, there are, so many different types of states and so many different types of administrative bodies and political actors. And, there is such a diversity within the state itself, as Jo says, that I think could be really interesting to explore further and to connect with the kind of reconstructive thinking that we do, and really highlight the things that state actors do, or the practices that enable better and more livable worlds. So I guess my question to you all is, does state centrism in any way resonate with you in your practice, in your work, in your ideas? How does it manifest, and would it be interesting to work with it in some way? Thank you.
Passing over to Catherine McKinnon.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Christina, I just tried to write your question in the chat, but I might not have quite got the phrasing right. So edit, please, but I'll put it in there because I think it would be nice for people to have it to reflect on. Look, thanks, everyone. So where to start? I sat down on Monday to prep my little tiny talk and ended up with a 3,000 word paper. What Kelly Dombrowski calls a spew draft. So where to start? Look, I think that my take on these sorts of issues that Jo and Christina are bringing up is my own practice in engagement with various branches of state bodies has been very much in line with the work I've done for the last 20 years, which is all about advocating for a politically aware, a politically astute professional practice in which what you're looking for are those points of weakness, the cracks in what we assume to be a sort of hegemonic system, those points where there's space to move, space to talk, space to create something different. And you're looking for those cracks where things can flourish in order to open up new possibility, in line with that, working with where we are and what we have in front of us. But more recently, I've become more and more dissatisfied with that approach, partly because what I'm confronted with is the incredible resilience of these institutions that I work with. So particularly in the context of development, international development work, the resistance to change of these bureaucracies. So you have these individuals and these groups that are within these bigger institutions who want to make change, who want to do something, who are keen to engage with you, but somehow the system itself is resistant. So I feel like I'm walking in this really tense, this space of tension that kind of sits between the possibility to exploit that diversity and work with it, and at the same time that threat of the co-option moment as well. So thinking through that and really wanting to think through that with all of you. At the moment, the context that I wanted to bring to this talk is a project that I've just started working on here where I am in central Victoria in Australia. And Melissa Kennedy is joining us. She's from La Trobe University, who is also working with me on that. The context of this is the local Shire Council wanting to do economic development differently, wanting to get outside the sort of jobs and growth narrative, wanting to take action where the federal government in Australia is failing to take action around environment, around social well-being, and the council is kind of the people in the council who are in charge of that area are looking at regenerative economics, are looking at donut economies kind of language, and in conversation with us, are getting really excited about community economies framing. So, you know, I've sat with the advisory group for the project, who are, you know, several members of council in that group, and we've done an iceberg together, and we've tried to do an actualization of Ethan Miller's livelihood triads by kind of tracing economic activities around what one must receive from others, what one makes for oneself, and what one makes for others. And that those have been real moments where there's been a lot of excitement in the room and a lot of real hope and a lot of just excitement about being able to see economies in different ways and think about how to create a different kind of economic development strategy. So there's moments of there are those glimmers of excitement within this system and spaces to work in, but at the same time, there are those tensions are there as well. And the particular tensions that I just wanted to mention briefly, I've got 3 of them, which link back to some of the earlier conversations in Liviana, particularly the session on the law and commoning with David Bollier, Janelle, I'm going to get the surname wrong, Orsi, Ethan Miller and Bronwyn Morgan, who were sort of, there was a parallel discussion there about some of these things. And also actually George DiMartino's conversation with George DiMartino in yesterday's session as well. There's some parallels there. So the 3 things are one is the excitement generated by sitting down with groups here to generate icebergs. People love that, but there's also been questions raised, and one question raised was a real puzzlement about, why are you interested in visibility? Why do you want to make all these different activities visible? What about the things that we don't want to be visible? Right, the things we don't want to be legible to any kind of authority. And there's a link there to what Ethan Miller was talking about in terms of wanting the work you do with legal frameworks to be limited, to be just enough, just a performance of playing the game correctly, so that you protect the spaces where the state is not, where you can do the real work. And if Ethan's here, I hope he doesn't mind me mashing his words in that way. But so you play the game in order to protect the spaces outside where you do the real radical work. So there's that relationship with the state that is also present here in the work that I'm doing. The other one is a question of language. So David Bollier talked about, he wanted to advocate for us. We need a big discourse. We need a discourse for our systems and structures to grow into, something that they can, that's big and well outside of the familiar current language, so that there's something for example, for my local council to move into that's new and different. At the same time as I'm the group is presenting a sort of discussion paper to council, and we're being really careful in that discussion paper to use language that's already a bridge and is already very familiar to them, so that they have a way to move forward into this new way of doing economy that's not threatening, that they're not just going to dismiss from the start as, oh, these outside consultants are nuts and we don't want to even go there. So there's a tension there in the move to the kind of radical new way versus a kind of tiny steps within the familiar. And finally there's the question of time and temporality, which is a lot on my mind at the moment. And George DiMartino was talking about a kind of ethics of professional practice for economists in his case, and the need to kind of refuse, or the difficulty of refusing when the work tips over into the unethical or the work that you don't believe in. And I think one of those moments where the institution and the system is so uncompromising is in time, is in the no, we have to have this discussion paper by this date so that we can put it through this bureaucratic process so it can get kicked off by then, so that it doesn't bleed into the next financial year. Then those made up deadlines, which will not move, and even though the people within it say, yes, I know it's unreasonable and we want it to move, but we just can't, like those structures have a life and power of their own, and end up with me being in that position of being forced to do work which I think is unethical, because I can't give time enough to the conversations with community. So that's kind of some of those spaces where there's both opportunity for change and shifting within that work with state bodies, but also the moments when you confront and how you shift those. And I'm really sorry, although we talked about coming up with a question, I haven't been able to frame a single question for the group from that, except perhaps to prompt maybe a discussion of perhaps something that I would love to think about is how do we frame for ourselves a set of navigation points for our engagements with and navigation of those really difficult tensions that I think a lot of us face in our work with various institutions, actually, the state being just one of them. What are the ways that we help? What should I do? Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, can you all just tell me what to do? That would be good. I'll stop there and let's we've got half an hour to open up for hopefully some discussion.
So I just tried to capture what you just said at the end there, Kath, but if you want to change how I wrote it, please go ahead. Just so people have got a little set there to have a look at. So yeah, so we've got half an hour. We're really keen to hear what you all think. We did think about the idea of sort of doing a go around so that everybody comes up, needs to contribute, but we've decided to go with more of a popcorn style. So open it up to the floor and who might have some initial thoughts to get that discussion going. Kelly.
Cool, thanks everyone. I was walking here really fast trying to make it in time to turn on my computer and come to the session because it's something I've been thinking about a lot. But I guess one thing I just wanted to throw into the mix really is about sort of thinking about policy as a kind of performative act in policy writing. And the reason I'm coming from this is I've just joined the Green Party policy writing team for economic transformation. And what I think the Green Party, I'm in New Zealand, what the Green Party of New Zealand did for this election was they had sort of speculative policy that thought really big, like how would we fund a minimum basic income? And then they did these massive big, like really impossible policies that probably wouldn't happen, but then costed them all out to show this is how it could actually happen if we had the political will to do it. And what I really liked about that as an approach was that they kind of owned that they were never going to be the people in power to make the decision, but they described a world that was different from what was currently present in the way that the other political parties were thinking in the state. And that ended up nudging, a couple of those policies through to other major parties. So I guess what I was thinking about was, what's the role of sort of that performance in policy making, even if it's unrealistic, or the speculative fiction, like the other session that Kath and Jenny and Molly were involved in. Yeah, so policy is speculative, potentially non-fiction or fiction.
Can I jump in there, just because I think that's really aligned with what I was thinking in terms of, so I feel, again, fairly daunted talking to people who are involved in political science and all sorts, but we've been looking at state funding of the arts, and I'm really like, I see so much potential for bringing the diverse economies thinking to that, and exactly for the reasons that Kelly was talking about. Well, to combine it with speculative fiction for those reasons, to kind of move beyond the sort of tinkering with this system, to kind of create this more speculative, and maybe it is a little bit of what you were saying, Catherine, around it kind of creates a possible shape of a future that things could grow into. Even if things don't grow into that future, it at least sort of makes a bit of a bigger leap of the imagination than typically happens in policy spaces. But I also just see so much. I really resonated with the idea of state centrism, and because I see that a lot in the arts literature, where it's looking at cultural policy and this kind of binary between the artists and the art sector and the state policy that's constraining us. And I think there's a need for a more diverse reading of the state in that space and its role as an ecosystem actor. I thought that was and that there's so much diversity within how the state operates in relation to arts and culture. And then, yeah, the idea that the state is often treated as a structural given, I think, is the case in a lot of writing about the state and cultural policy in relation to the arts and the arts sector. So yeah, lots of stuff that resonated, and yeah, I think that's probably what I've got to say.
Thanks, Kat and Molly. That's sorry, Kelly, Molly. That's great. Robert Winthrop, you've just put something into the chat. Would you like to speak to that at all?
There, can you hear me? Good. Thanks. I find I'm new to the Liviana and so on. I'm a Rob Winthrop. I'm an environmental anthropologist in Washington, DC, and I had responded in the chat to Dr. McKinnon's comments, excuse me, about the three tensions of visibility and language and time, and these have obviously a deep, each one of these has a deep, culturally deep aspect, but on a more practical, on a more logistical level, these are everyday dilemmas for those of us, that probably includes most of this group, working across a cultural boundary in a systematic way, and particularly where there is a governmental authority as part of the equation. And my work was always I worked, for example, on hydro relicensing and sacred sites claims, and in relation to things like fishing, traditional fishing rights or so forth. So there was always a governmental power and a tribal power, a tribal, in the US, we would tribal government, but more importantly, a tribal community. And all of those there was I'd say, for the community of people doing this type of interface, and particularly for my native colleagues, there were familiar ways of managing at least the superficial aspects of this. So for example, in technical reports, I gradually learned to put both a more analytical presentation that would resonate with the engineers at a utility or a federal agency, and extensive descriptive excerpts of Native colleagues who are talking in their own words about a given resource. It's all in the same report. And the question of visibility and what should not be disclosed is just mostly it's a practical question, because once you get past the notion that we're talking about different knowledge systems with different ethical principles behind them, and today that's a fairly widely understood notion. So, and as to the time dimension, absolutely that cuts to the heart of any sort of contractual work, but I have nothing profound to say, just to say generally there are two options: to refuse to do the work under those circumstances, or to make very explicit in one's findings that this is very preliminary, and here was the time frame that was allowed and therefore can't be taken definitive. And then finally, just in this bureaucratic give and take, or this give and take between bureaucrats, and I was later one, so that was in the next career. So there's poetic justice, but in this give and take, that where there's information being brought forward, this probably is irrelevant to what Dr. McKinnon is saying, but in these government-sponsored or government-used reports, it's crucial that the group whose information and whose rights and whose territory is touched on have equal editorial control. I don't mean that they get to determine what is said necessarily, although sometimes that's appropriate, but they absolutely have the right to indicate any disagreements, so that it becomes a joint document. That's way down in the weeds from the larger question. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rob. That's great. And the number of those comments have sort of speak almost to the idea of being bilingual or multilingual and needing to do these kinds of engagements that, with performing or playing the game on the one side with all of the language and the ways of working, and then trying to work out how we get on with doing the things that we actually want to do. And I think there's also a number of elements in what everyone's said so far that come to Catherine's thoughts about, is there a way we could come up with principles or something for engaging this? I think there's some seed starters in there, but I can see, Justin, you've got your hand up, so I'll pass over to you. And please, Catherine and Christina, if you want to respond to any of the discussion or comments, just jump in. Just trying to steer here. Thanks, Justin.
Sure. Well, my comments are a little disparate because the questions are a little bit different, but I think, in response to some of the questions, I'm sure, like many of you, the idea of the state as a monolith is really a very false concept. It's a composition of many individuals who are ranged from absolutely anarchist to the other end of the spectrum, and you have to take each person as they are. And every project I've ever had has to engage with the state in some way. It's pretty unavoidable, ranging from projects in Botswana where we're trying to convince, and there's an open door that convinces the state to work on a less state-centric and more kind of indigenous government-centric system, to Brazil where the law we're taking advantage of could be changed by a state that's very fickle. And so you have to, you can't avoid that, but you also have people, they're individuals who are are really passionate about change, and I have to engage with it. I think, speaking to other questions, the challenge I always engage with is you have to keep on approaching these relationships with individuals in the state with optimism and a level of hopefulness, even though very often it moves into, I won't say abuse, but like, are you being exploited? Are they actually going to do anything? Are you just, are you part of their performance? Like, we can tick a box, or they have good intentions, but they don't really get that, like, you need to get paid at some point. So I don't know how we negotiate, and this also works with the partners I work with. Like, how do we negotiate? You know, clearly partners who are rooted in those places, I'm often not rooted in them, so I can kind of say, oh, bye. But how do you negotiate? Like, this is the place where you are. These are the people you have to work with. There's a point where sometimes there's a very obvious point where you're clearly like, okay, they're not moving forward, or I'm being taken advantage of. But at the same time, you can't pull back too soon, because you know that's where these things eventually happen, is that repeated engagement. So navigating that is really difficult, and I feel like also supporting partners to navigate that is really difficult. So that's the tension that I engage with state work. So yeah.
Sounds very familiar.
I think part of the issue with all of this, with what, you know, with all the very familiar issues that both Justin and Robert are talking through, is there's a question of how do we sustain ourselves through all of that. The other conversation that we had in the law and commoning session was a conversation about the ways in which you get sick because you are struggling with all these tensions. You know, you're trying to work across different knowledge systems. You're trying to be an advocate in contexts in which the advocacy is you know, you realize too late you're just a tick box, right? Or all of those things that are happening all the time. And I wrote in my PhD years ago about the cynicism of development professionals, and the ones that had a huge impact in their careers were the ones who just kept going with exactly what you're talking about, Justin, with kind of hope and optimism and okay, I'm in here again, I'm trying again, I'm just keeping on. Yeah. So where's the point where you hit refusal with all of that, and how do we sustain ourselves?
And that's perhaps where the principles could help, if we had something to draw on there that could help be a guide in that. Anna.
Yes, thank you for introducing, I think, these really interesting and relevant topics. I'm coming from the Netherlands, where I study food forestry, which is a type of agriculture. I really resonate also with what Justin said about hope. And one of my topics at the moment is actually using effect theory to look at how certain practices within kind of bureaucratic contexts at different levels of governance, so at the municipal level, at the provincial level, have actually made changes possible to sort of promote and advance food forestry in the Netherlands. So I'm also kind of thinking about how to do this performative ontological project and take it to actually the state itself, or not the state, but other levels of governance, and see if there's anything there that we can maybe amplify by just like shedding light on how it actually happened. And I'm trying to use effect theory now to kind of see if there's anything there. But I very much resonate with your questions as well. And I think it's a very complex thing to sort of tackle. But this is, I think, my experience and what I'm sort of experimenting with at the moment in terms of this topic.
Wow, that'd be interesting. I'm sure there'll be lots of people in the network be interested to hear how you go with that, Anna. Justin's raised in the chat the issue of and I guess it's another ethical turning point is, it's not just us usually when we're engaging with state actors. We're often bringing other community partners or community organisations with us into those projects and conversations, and they quite often are even less well resourced than we are. So, finding ways to kind of almost protect their engagement in some fashion as well is, always, I think, something that's in front of mind when you're doing this kind of work. Catherine.
Thanks. Oh, were you saying me? Yeah, okay. I was just thinking about the speculative kind of policy that the Greens might be putting forward, but whether there's a need for some kind of inventory of actual cases of forms of governance, or which could be state related or community related or whatever, that are doing things differently, or that are supporting community economies, or even having planning systems that aren't tied to particular timeframes and so on, and how it might be useful to do a kind of collection, an inventory of cases from all around the world that show forms of policy and governance, both state related and non-state related, that would kind of showcase these things. So rather than try and build the big edifice of the complete policy, we just have all these bits and pieces of inventories that could be like mix and match, because there are places where universal basic incomes are being tried out at a city level, for instance. There probably are places where local governments have been enticed into having an open time frame. This was the kind of thing that I think Jenny and I were talking about way back in the Latrobe Valley, about the option for a much more open-ended kind of intervention in local economic development. But getting the bureaucrats to take that risk was going to be really hard. But there must be places where that is being done. And I just think it could be a very interesting exercise for us to start to marshal those both legal and illegal forms of kind of work, making livings, governing selves, and not just at the local level, but also at more regional levels. And I think, obviously with Indigenous communities, there's a lot of examples already of this kind of thing. And I just wonder whether that could be a useful project to try and flesh out this diversity of forms of governance, whether we want to call it the state or policy or whatever. But anyway, I'm just starting to get inspired about another handbook. No, I'm not.
I just want to leap in with a response briefly to that from Kath, which is just, Kath, I think that in Victoria, there has been a flow-on effect a little bit from those conversations about the temporality. So the local Shire Council, although their timeframes for producing the strategy are absolutely immovable, the strategy itself is being thought of as one it's not like a 5-year or 10-year strategy. It's let's talk about where we want to go, and we're not talking about goals that we know we'll have got in 10 years. So there has been a shift there in thinking about how you do it, which has taken hold in Victoria,
That's very interesting. Kelly and Kath, do you still have your hand up, or is that again? Okay, Kelly.
I was just reflecting on some of the questions, and then Justin's question about how sustain local partners. And I think I was thinking about the work that my team has done and how we've been enabled to sustain local community organisations with their interactions with the state, because we're funded as researchers, actually also by the state, but a different part of the state. So we're using state funding to ask community groups who are doing cool things in the city, what kind of support do you need from researchers? And then we were developing ways to communicate and assess the citywide wellbeing outcomes of what they were doing, and then reporting it back to the local council, but using this national level state funding. So when you talk about the state as sort of diverse and heterogeneous, I think that's exactly what's happening there. And maybe the difference from Catherine's situation, where you're employed directly by the city council and you're kind of, having to meet their deadlines, because we were kind of, employed by the community organizations, we didn't have that same kind of constraint. So I kind of like the idea of repurposing state funds from one area and then using them to kind of do something in another area.
Diverse resourcing of work in this space. It's very interesting. I just want to throw one other thing into the mix, and then I'll come to Anna. It's because it's been raised sort of obliquely a couple of times, and we actually ran a workshop yesterday here in Brisbane, and then last night there was a dinner with some senior bureaucrats in Queensland government. So it's very fresh in my mind in terms of the perspective that, you know, they kind of bring to it an enormous frustration of working within the bureaucracy, and there's such, you know, inspired and committed people, and they're just really rubbing up against, you know, all kinds of the usual things that we've spoken about at smaller and grander scales. But one of the questions that came up, and others have raised it here in roundabout ways, is the tension between what I call going under the radar, or doing the performative piece, or sort of doing just as much as you need to kind of keep everybody happy, so that then you can get on with the real business. And then you know, the fact that we actually want some of these structural inhibitors or constraints to shift over time. And if you go under the radar all the time, and Justin's comment as well about, you know, people say they want the cases and they want the examples, but then when it comes to it, they quite often don't want to share them, or won't, or can't, because of restrictions they've got from a policy perspective around that. So, you know, there's these real tensions about getting on with the work and just getting as much as we can done with and through, you know, the existing sort of edifice. And then actually we want to shift some of those elements of that edifice over time. And how do we hold that balance, and how do we sort of navigate that and find the openings and opportunities to sort of get the sort of acupuncture point in to shift something that's a bit longer term or a bit more structural than just sort of making do in the meantime, I suppose. So throwing that out there as well. So but I'll come to Anna and then Jerry.
Yes, thanks. I think, yeah, also what you said about like either the trade-off between going under the radar or, yeah, kind of negotiating with bureaucratic structures is also something that I've really encountered in my work with the food force. In the Netherlands, food force have become so ubiquitous at this point that there's really no going around them anymore. And they're just really demanding collectively that the structural conditions for them are just, yeah, going to be improved. And food forests often don't really fit within the bureaucratic boxes that have been established in the Netherlands, such as agriculture, nature, culture, recreation, you name it. And I also do experience that there is kind of this kind of bureaucratic realism here, where people think that the deadlines are what they are, they cannot be changed. But I found that actually they can be changed if someone thinks it's beneficial for them to change and they're in a position to change it. So what I've now noticed is that some changes have been happening when some ally was found within a certain body of governance, and these alliances sort of led to enable and facilitate changes that actually helped food forests gain a little bit more of a legitimate position within the bureaucracy. So I thought, yeah, it's been really nice to see some of these changes within the bureaucracy, kind of also showing some of the cracks within that bureaucratic realism, and that, often the bureaucracy is not even defined necessarily at a state level, but it's also very much up to the civil servants on a specific portfolio. So there is just a lot more possible than people think there is sometimes, and I think. Yeah, of course, I'm speaking from a Dutch context, so it's going to be very different elsewhere. But here, at least, through these alliances, some things have been able to sort of change over time. And now that they are becoming more common and becoming more popular and just greater in numbers, more and more provinces and municipalities are actually also forced to start thinking about changing their bureaucratic categories for zoning plans and the like. So that food forests can actually be established in specific areas.
Interesting, a good reminder that all of those things are decisions that can be made. They're not necessarily givens. So Jerry, I'll come to you, and then I might, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I might then just go to Catherine and Christina to see if you had any final thoughts or reflections you'd like to offer back into the group. Thanks, Jerry.
Yeah, I just I've loved a lot of the interventions that I hear. I'm scribbling away notes, so I just really want to signal my appreciation for such a vibrant conversation. A lot of my work is to do with community policy and how that relate, or the interface between community economies or communities and community policy. And I really have a strong sense. I don't want to be like, yeah, the state or the state are actually good guys. I don't want to speak against these anarchists that you're talking about, Justin, or do them down. But one of the things when you spend time with policymakers and see them, they are often doing a lot of the same things that we're talking about from the community perspective. So they're frustrated by the time deadlines. They're smuggling in different ends and objectives that they have into set policies. There's a diversity of actors within different policy initiatives that are they're playing the budgets to see what can we get spent this year compared to next year. So a lot of the things that we're saying that's happening on the grassroots is also happening within the policy instruments that's affecting the grassroots actors and activists, which I don't think is a new insight, but it's just to re-emphasize the diversity that exists even within the policies themselves. But it's a great discussion. I'm loving it.
Christina, do you want to go first, and then?
Yeah, I know. I really resonate with Jerry's comment in thinking about how the state here intended as, you know, the bureaucratic machine and the law is really an actor in itself, or a set of different actors in themselves that could be super interesting to look at. I mean, because, you know, both people who work for the machine and people who are, you know, affected by it have to navigate it in some way. And I just kind of visualized this machinic thing when you started naming those examples, Jerry. So yeah, that's another perspective as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It's been a great discussion. It's a shame it's only an hour long actually, but I think it's a really a good starting point for more discussion to go forward with. I think what I'm coming away with is a sense of I'm seeing in my mind a sort of possibility of being able to begin mapping out those different spaces and opportunities for doing things differently in partnership with state or from within state bodies as well. So, you know, there's different spaces in which different strategies are possible. So the smuggling and the subterfuge versus the, you know, introduction of a radical discourse versus the refusal and the pushing back. Maybe there are just even mapping out who and when and where and what in that kind of really diverse way would be really helpful, I think, for me in thinking about in what moment can I occupy which position, and in what moment am I trying to build and create change in what way. So because otherwise it's very much the sense of coming up against the state and it's all impossible. Whereas if you've got that kind of map of diversity, of diverse opportunity, diverse practice, diverse actors, then you've got a sense of, okay, right, in this moment today, I'm choosing this one. This is where I sit, and it's this piece of the bigger alliance that I hold with others that are also trying to create change and action in different moments. So it's been super helpful. Thank you, everybody.
That's great, and I think you're hitting on that positionality, Catherine, is so key, because, you know, that reminding us that we don't have to take the same role, the same position, the same kind of mindset into each discussion. You know, there's multiple opportunities here for thinking. I think that's a really good reminder as well. So in the interest of honouring time and your busy days, evenings and mornings, we'll finish up there. But it sounds like we've got a great seed for a possible piece of, you know, collective collating, at least initially, of some examples and things that could come out of it. So, you know, we'll keep thinking about that. And thanks to everybody for contributing for really rich discussion today. I absolutely love this topic. So thanks all for making time to be part of it.
Thank you
Travel
so
well.
much.
Thanks, Joe, for making it happen.
Yeah, Joe, you're amazing. Thank you.